Who's letting you down at the tight end position right now? Is it Evan Ingram because he's been dealing with an injury? Is it Mark Andrews, who disappeared once again to begin 2025? Or a guy like Brenton Strange, who you were hoping was going to be a sleeper this year? Well, let's take a look at what options are out there heading into week 2 of the NFL season. And Thursday Night Football, do we really even need to take a chance here? Darren Waller is already ruled out again, and the Miami Dolphins haven't even targeted any of their tight ends over the first 2 weeks of the season. So we all know this is a big no here for the Miami Dolphins. And for those of you that want to play Dalton Kincaid, I mean, you can if you want to, but like I just said, do we want to risk it on Thursday night, or do you have a better option later in the week? Right now, it's basically even between Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox. Last week, Dawson Knox saw 55% of the snaps, while Dalton Kincaid only saw 48%. Knox had 5 targets, Kincaid had 6 targets. These guys are splitting time right now. They've got 3 wide receivers who they really like running around as well, and they're running the football well. I just don't trust anybody on Thursday Night Football for either of these teams when it comes to the tight end position. Tucker Kraft is coming off of a huge week, and for Green Bay going up against Cleveland, you're definitely going to be starting him in your lineup, but let me just caution you, we've seen this from Tucker Kraft before. Cleveland is allowing the 6th fewest fantasy points to tight ends over the first 2 weeks of the season, and we've seen this from Tucker Kraft before, where he has huge blow-up games, and it looks like he's on the precipice of being a top tight end option, only to unfortunately disappear after that. Missing Jayden Reed could definitely help, and he's been so good, you're not going to sit him anyway. So keep riding it for right now, and we'll see if he's more consistent than he has been in the past. Green Bay right now is allowing the 5th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. In week 1, they faced Sam Laporta. They gave up 6 receptions on 9 targets for 79 yards. In week 2, they faced Zach Ertz. They had 8 targets, 6 receptions, 64 yards, and a touchdown. Njoku is still playing 80% of the snaps right now, and I know Harold Fanning got in his way during week 1, but here in week 2, playing a more traditional tight end role, I'll go David Njoku in a strong matchup. Daniel Jones looks like that big goofy blue dude from Monstars. They probably sucked all the talent out of Sam Darnold when they both left Minnesota at the end of last season. And now he's out here balling out for the Indianapolis Colts. Well, that's good for Tyler Warren because right now he is a top 12 option at the tight end position. The volume is just way too good to pass up. Chigioco had 6 targets last week. That was great to see because he was a guy that I thought could end up having a big week, but he didn't really turn those into a whole lot. He's got 10 targets over the first 2 weeks of the season, which is not horrible, but until we start to see that playmaking ability and him do something with the targets, we can't risk it with Chigioco. I am staying away from the Cincinnati tight ends in this matchup. No Joe Burrow, split time with these guys. Last week, Mike Gesicki, 52%. Noah Fant was at 25%, but it was the exact opposite the week prior when Noah Fant would play more than Mike Gesicki. I really don't know what the rotation is, and I don't know what we're going to do with Jake Browning yet at this point, but I'll look to different options with more upside. I know TJ Hockenson has been a disappointment so far, and JJ McCarthy has not played his best football. We've seen a decent stretch in the second half against the Chicago Bears, but unfortunately outside of that, it's been very inconsistent for this offense. So we'll see what Carson Wentz does while JJ McCarthy nurses his ankle over the next 2 to 4 weeks. TJ Hockenson is still playing 72% of the snaps. He's out there on offense all of the time. Well, not all the time, but a majority of the time. That's going to give him some options and opportunity with Wentz at quarterback. What are we going to do with the tight ends in Pittsburgh? That is a big question mark right now. Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth are both seeing targets in this game plan, but Jonnu Smith is the one that I think has the most touchdown upside right now. This past week, Jonnu Smith played 56% of the snaps, Pat Freiermuth 50% of the snaps. This is going to continue to be a headache for a majority of the season. But going up against New England, who allow almost 12 fantasy points per game to tight ends over the first 2 weeks of the year, I'll take a shot with Jonnu Smith if you don't have anybody that's safer. Hunter Henry did his best disappearing act once again this past week. Now, the good news is Hunter Henry played 85% of the snaps. However, Austin Hooper had a better day statistically and was also on the field 62% of the time. It looks like New England might start utilizing 12 personnel a little bit more often. And with the way they ran the football this past week, wouldn't be shocked if they do the same thing against Pittsburgh this week. The LA Rams and the Philadelphia Eagles have a couple of different tight ends that you want to start, but I really don't know if we can. Tyler Higbee is a guy that he's just not one of the guys right now. It's Puka and it's Adams. They're getting 20 plus targets combined. So after that, Matthew Stafford is just spreading the ball around. Tyler Higbee has to score a touchdown to be fantasy viable. He just doesn't really have any upside at this point. For the Philadelphia Eagles, I gotta list Dallas Goedert as a sit right now because I really don't know what's going on with him health-wise this week. It's still a little too early in the week to know for sure when Dallas Goedert will end up being back, and we don't have an update at this point in time. We'll keep an eye on it, check the rankings later in the week. We might have some more information then. The New York Jets and the Tampa Bay Bucks have a lot of what ifs at the tight end position right now. Mason Taylor is insanely talented, but he's just not being looked at. Justin Fields may end up missing this week because he's currently in the concussion protocol. And if that happens, we'll have to see if Tyrod Taylor may look to Mason Taylor a little bit more often. During his Buffalo days, he tried to keep the tight end in mind. We absolutely love that. We'll see if we can do the same thing this week. Cade Otton is going to be a fringe start candidate for me. Couple of different reasons why. Number one, he plays a whole lot of snaps. We've talked about this before. He's on the field an awful lot. He's just not looked at. Number two, the matchup. Right now, the New York Jets, through the first 2 weeks, have allowed the 8th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. So there is an opportunity for Cade Otton this week. Now, he only had 4 targets last week, which is not great. But if we can get him 4, 5, 6 targets this week, maybe a touchdown, maybe your bigger play against a team that has allowed a few points here over the last couple of weeks, Cade Otton could be right on the precipice of finding himself as a top 12 tight end. Las Vegas and Washington has probably the best tight end matchup of the week with Brock Bowers and Zach Ertz. And you know, as the tight end whisperer, I was looking at this matchup right away. But do you know who loves tight ends more than your boy? It's our sponsors, Tushy. Y'all have been coming to me for tight end advice for years now, and more times than not, I do not let you down. But Tushy loves tight ends just as much as I do. And for as much help as I give you all with your fantasy roster tight ends, Tushy can help you take care of your real life tight end. And if you head on over to hellotushy.com or use the link down in the description below, you can check out their great line of products. And you can also get 10% off right now by using code word headliners. And if you purchase anything from Tushy, make sure you leave us a comment down below and let us know your experience as well. Washington is currently allowing the 6th most fantasy points per game to start the season to opposing tight ends. You know we are starting Brock Bowers. Zach Ertz's matchup is not nearly as nice as Brock Bowers, but he's been the tight end 9 and the tight end 2 over the last couple of weeks, and he's got back-to-back weeks with a touchdown now. We'll fire up Zach Ertz in a wasteland of tight ends. Let's go ahead and go with some consistency so far this season. Kyle Pitts has a great matchup going up against the Carolina Panthers this week, who are currently allowing the 3rd most fantasy points per game at 18.9 fantasy points to begin the season. This is a great matchup. Kyle Pitts has 13 targets over his first 2 games. We'll fire up Kyle Pitts once again as well. And for Ja'Tavion Sanders, Atlanta's only allowing 1 fantasy point per game to opposing tight ends. Now, yes, it's through 2 weeks, and that could dramatically change, but their defense looks way better this year than we have seen over the past few years. I'm taking a look at Ja'Tavion Sanders, and right now his splits are excellent for Carolina. He's playing 66% of the snaps compared to Tommy Tremble, who's only playing 44. And last week, Sanders had 9 targets, 7 receptions, and 54 receiving yards. It's something that I've talked about over the first couple of weeks. Sanders was really good to end 2024. Where was he in 2025? We might be heating up. Houston and Jacksonville, and both of them kind of look lost right now. The passing game for Houston, CJ Stroud just isn't getting it done. The offensive line isn't blocking. They just look like they're a mess. I mean, do you want to go with Nico Collins? Sure. Do you want to go with Nick Chubb? Maybe, maybe not. I said no this week. I'm not going to go with Dalton Schultz either. There's really only one guy that we can look at in Houston right now and say, yeah, we'll put him in our lineup. Brenton Strange, unless somehow or another he can get up to the number 2 target, I just don't think it's going to happen from a fantasy perspective this year. It's going to be Brian Thomas Jr., it's going to be Travis Hunter, and then it's going to be a mix of Brenton Strange, Parker Washington, Dyami Brown. We don't know on a weekly basis just how good Brenton Strange may or may not be. If somebody goes down with an injury, maybe he pops up to that number 2 role. If someone goes down with an injury and there's not nearly as much of a mix for number 3, maybe we have some more clarity. But as of right now, against the Houston defense that's done a pretty solid job this year, I just can't risk it with Strange this week. I'll find somebody else with a little bit better floor. Evan Engram is a prime example of why it's so difficult to talk about fantasy football players who are injured. Because last week, guys like Evan Engram is what puts us in between a rock and a hard place. Because at the beginning of the week, hey, Evan Engram is injured, he may not play. And then we get to the middle of the week and Denver's like, oh yeah, like he's going to be good to go. And then we get to game time and he only plays 43% of the snaps because he's not 100%. What is it, Denver? What is it, NFL teams? We don't get nearly enough information when it comes to injuries. And because of that, we really have to stick our neck out to try and figure out what's going on. Because here's the issue. Last week, if we would have told everybody, nah, I don't know, we probably shouldn't risk it with Evan Engram because he's been injured, and then he goes off, everyone would have been like, see, you should have played Evan Engram. You guys liked him before the season started and you're already off the bandwagon, and that's not even what would have happened. Or we could have done what we did and said, hey, I don't know for certain how much he's going to play. We're going to rank him as if he's going to be good to go. We'll put him at tight end 7. And then he disappears and people are upset because we ranked him so high. That's why when it comes to injuries, you kind of just have to play it by your gut. If you feel like that he's not going to be doing anything, then just sit him on your bench and find a different option. If you feel like he's going to be good to go, then roll him out there. This week, I'm going to still list him as a sit. I'm not interested in rolling with Evan Engram until I know for certain that he is good to go. I would rather have him potentially go off against the Chargers this week and have him be on my bench while I play somebody else that I feel a little bit better with than put him in my lineup and have him still not be 100%. For the Los Angeles Chargers, Justin Herbert just isn't looking at his tight ends. Over the last couple of years, he's traditionally been a guy that tries to keep his tight ends involved. But this year, it is all about the wide receivers because we are looking at Quentin Johnston, Keenan Allen. We've got Ladd McConkey out there trying to run the football with Omari and Hampton. There just isn't enough room for either of these guys to get a consistent amount of targets since they're both out there anyway. Listen, if you've been a subscriber for the Fantasy Headliners for at least a year and a half, 2 years, then you have known that I have always spoken highly of Juwan Johnson. And I knew the talent has been there, and unfortunately, he's been more of a red zone threat. But at the beginning of the year, I said kind of the same thing. Do they unleash Juwan Johnson and use him as an athlete in between the 20s? Or do they continue to just use him as a red zone threat and we have to wait on touchdowns when they get into the red zone? New Orleans has listened, and now he's been the tight end 4 and the tight end 3 over the first 2 weeks of the season. And guess what? He's facing the team that allows the most fantasy points per game over the first 2 weeks of the year to tight ends. Whew. Fire up Juwan Johnson. Through the first 2 weeks of the year, the New Orleans Saints have allowed 16 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. That is the 7th most in the league. AJ Barner right now is playing 89% of the snaps and coming off of a touchdown from last week. And I know people out there love Elijah Arroyo, but AJ Barner is the guy right now. And if they can get him going and get him consistent targets, he's going to become a fantasy viable tight end. He is a playmaking tight end. Keep an eye on his name. He's going to be a fringe start for me this week. Probably a guy that doesn't quite get into the top 12 unless he scores a touchdown. And then if he does, he will definitely be in there. Dallas at Chicago, Jake Ferguson looking sexy last week. That's the Jake Ferguson I know can be fantasy viable for us on a consistent basis. 12 targets, 9 receptions, 78 yards. He's got 18 targets over the first couple of weeks of the season. And right now, he might be the number 2 target behind CeeDee Lamb in an offense that is running the football a lot better than we expected, which is helping to open things up. Colston Loveland had 1 target last week. Cole Kmet had 2 targets last week. If you're playing either of these guys, you're in a way worse situation than even they are. Arizona and San Francisco should have been our matchup of the week at the tight end position, but unfortunately, George Kittle injured himself in week 1. Trey McBride obviously is going to be a top 3 tight end this week. He's getting more volume than anyone else, and he's clearly the #1 target in Arizona. However, Jake Tonjes is a little bit of a sleeper candidate at the tight end position for me this week, and that's why I'm going to list him as a fringe start. Right now, Arizona is allowing the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends over the first 2 weeks of the season. Jake Tonjes last week saw 5 targets. If you can give me 5 targets this week against Arizona, you're probably going to get a potential top 12 performance. I am really glad that Travis Swift-Kelce had the loving arms of somebody to go home to on Sunday, because that ball that hit you in the hands and flew up in the air, which should have been a touchdown and completely changed the course of the game, probably cost your team and your fantasy owners quite a bit of points. Travis Kelce is still seeing a decent amount of targets. Even with that dropped pass, he was the tight end 3 and the tight end 12 to begin the season, and he should have 2 touchdowns as of now. It is what it is. I'm still going to move forward with him, though, because really, are there any better options right now outside of like 3 or 4 guys? I really want Theo Johnson to become a thing, and I'm going to keep trying to talk it into existence as the number 3 at best target behind Wan'Dale Robinson and Malik Nabers. Right now, 5 targets, 4 receptions, 34 receiving yards. That's not going to be enough to get it done. That's a good start if we can get 5 targets and 4 receptions, but get some better big playability or some touchdowns. Theo Johnson could be on the cusp. And like I said, I'm going to keep talking it into existence. And hopefully by the end of the season, we're talking about him as being a fantasy reliable tight end. Baltimore is currently allowing the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Sam Laporta is off to a heck of a start this season. If it hadn't been for needing to leave the game last week for a little bit, he probably would have had pretty good numbers in week 2 as well. Give me some Sam Laporta as a start on Monday Night Football. For Mark Andrews, no, we are done with Mark Andrews for right now. Does he have a 2024-esque turnaround? Maybe, but the guy's not even being looked at right now. I'm not dealing with it. I'm not going to worry about it. If you've got Mark Andrews, I don't know if I drop him as of right yet, because we all saw what happened last year. But if I were you, I would at least find a different starting tight end to move forward with until Andrews gets hot, if he does. Headliner Nation, tight end start and sit analysis. Hopefully this video gave you some things to think about, and hopefully it gave you some options at the tight end position. If you don't have one of those guys, you feel like you can plug and play on a weekly basis. And if your tight end just isn't startable this week, then make sure you check out our waiver wire video that comes out on Monday to see if there's anybody there that you may still be able to get your hands on. Headliner Nation, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.